Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the LJL Officially Unofficial Podcast, episode 34. Wait, no, the script here says we're on season 2, episode 1, ladies and gentlemen. That cosplay content will not be happening. I'm sorry to inform you. I am one of your co-hosts, Alex, otherwise known as by MaskedSwan on the internet, and on the opposite side of this screen is the inspiring man himself, Nymaera. Nymaera, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Lexi. We'll be keeping track of the episode number, of course. We did have a promise right at the start of things, where if we manage to get 100 podcast episodes, we might do a show in podcast. Well, look, we'll see how that works out. Anyway, it's a new season. I'd like to say, like it's new year, new me. It's not quite that. I'm still actually Alex Nymaera Hapgood. But I am here to talk LJL 2021.
Beautiful. And we couldn't be forgetting anybody, can we, Nymaera? I think we've covered everything. Let's get right into. Oh wait, the man in the middle. The man in the middle, the astute man himself. Initia1ise, of course. Welcome.
He's the astute one because
always.
We just didn't realize he was there. Yeah.
Exactly.
You nearly left the diamond in the rough, boys, but I'm still here. I'm still ready to be chatting LJL.
Oh.
True enough.
Oh,
I'm gonna go cry in the corner. You guys clearly don't need me, and we'll move on. I did like 20 ranked games, so I don't play a lot of ranked. So yes, I think it was something like that. In fairness.
Well, before you do that, Initia1ise, could you potentially tell our lovely listeners what is this podcast if they're new here?
It's basically these two roasting me, clearly. No, we chat about the LJL and the goings on there. This is kind of our English shoulder content to chat about things we don't have time to do on broadcast. Roster moves and decisions made in game and all those kind of nitty-gritty bits about meta and the rest of it as well.
And I mean, if we're doing this, do we have any affiliation with Riot Games, Nymaera?
Oh, it feels good that you're asking me that again.
It's been a while.
Of course, you asked that of us all of last year, and the answer is still no. Nothing to do with Riot. This is our own content, our own creation. We do it from our own platform, and that means we have no ties to anyone else.
And that does mean all of what we're saying are our own views and opinions. You can find all of us at Nymaera, at Initia1ise with a 1, and at MaskedSwan on most, if not every social media platform. You can also find out more information about the LJL Officially Unofficial by simply talking LJL OU into almost any search bar, and you should find us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We have a Discord server. Invite link will be in the show notes, but if you also type it in, there are multiple ways of finding it. And you can also find this podcast on all audio streaming platforms that you love to enjoy. Gentlemen, it feels good to be back. It's been a while.
It really does.
Yeah,
I mean, oh, we've done it again. That was both of us doubling up at the same time. I tell you what, I'm gonna take this one. Yes, this is what we're talking about. The play-by-play goes first. Yeah, that feels good. I'm really excited to be back. I think we've got quite a lot of stuff to cover in this first episode as well. Like, a lot has changed since Worlds. A lot has changed, since the end of summer. And we've got, many rosters, many changes in players, play styles, a little bit of drama to get over as well. So I'm quite looking forward to covering it all for you guys.
It's a whistle-stop tour.
It's definitely going to have to be one of those because we've got a lot to go through. Nymaera, would you mind helping me run through this very quickly? We've got big news, especially over in the LJL. Bunch of rosters have completely blown up. And what's our next topic after that?
So, I mean, if we're talking about this is effectively like the headlines at 7, we're going through all of that. So there's a lot of stuff about roster news. That includes people coming into the region and leaving the region altogether. The stuff about some of the drama around those moves is, so that'll be the next thing we kind of segue into.
Yeah, in that kind of rosters and drama and everything, rumors. Some of the notable teams, DFM we're gonna be talking about. Burning Core we're gonna be talking about very briefly, and V3. Some of the big names there. Well, got 2 Worlds competitors and the team that almost took down DFM in the quarterfinals in the LJL. Like, a lot happened over there. Moving on to the last topic, Nymaera. What are we hoping to see change? Can you run us through that quickly?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it will be about our opinion, our perspective on the LJL and what we've learned, and therefore what we think steps that could be taken by some of the teams or the region as a whole going into the next year in terms of their mindset, in terms of like looking forward, not just lamenting on the failure of what happened at play-ins, because spoilers, it
A
didn't
very
go so
initialized
great.
saying, I feel like that.
Yeah, for sure. And there's stuff like, well, there's no LJL Academy system right now. What do we think about that?
My soapbox,
yes. And then some more thoughts just to cap it off one last time about what we thought about the last couple of years of LJL international representatives.
And Initialize, would you mind covering the last two parts? And arguably, the last part is the most important part.
I mean, after that, we will see if we'll drop a few hot tips. Obviously, we're not doing full predictions this episode, guys. We'll be doing that next episode. But even so, we'll be dropping a few of our hints about some of the rosters we think are going to be really good, especially some of the ones you might not expect if you've only been following casually. And after that, we've got quite a lot of questions, actually, from our guys in the Discord. So we've got a lot to cover there. So some interesting ones coming up, particularly around meta and what we expected, how we expect it will apply to the LJL as a whole.
Indeed. We've got a lot to go through here. So, gentlemen, let's get right into it. First things first, we've got huge news, especially for the LJL. We've got V3 roster collapsing alongside Sengoku, Crest Gaming, Axis. We still don't know anything about. I think I've frozen. I'm not quite sure. I'm going to keep going anyway. We've got the Hawks. Oh, perfect. And we've got Rascal Jester. Only Burning Core and Dead Nation folks we really kept that. There's a lot to really go through here.
There is. So I guess the first big thing is, what's the last LJL team that we saw play? It was V3 at Worlds Play-ins. They've lost quite a few members. Not everyone has renewed their contracts. A lot of people moving elsewhere, and that means we're going to go see a very different V3 coming into this year.
Yeah, I agree on that one. There's a little bit more to this. We'll recover a little bit later on as to what's gone on with the roster, but the fact that effectively only Ace has remained is kind of an eyebrow raiser, honestly. And Reiner, sorry, that's right. So, I mean, like, in fairness, Reiner was one of my MVP candidates for last split. He was genuinely amazing, really had a good showing on particularly things like set, so I'm happy he stayed an Ace. Definitely has his strengths, right? He's a fantastic roamer and the rest of it, but it'll be interesting to see what's going on there for sure.
I mean, big no. Other names, I mean, Sengoku, who we know spent a lot of money on their roster, has pretty much boomed completely outside of NT, who has stayed on the roster, which is well, granted, he is the man who has locked himself into third place minimum every single time he started playing in the LJL, and played with 2 to 3 different rosters now. Is that going to be a continuation? That's going to be a big question for me moving forward. Massively. For them. Crest Gaming Act, I mean, the big one, which we will talk about later, is obviously they're going to be around DFM, and obviously the change that happened there. Axis just haven't given us anything, lads.
Nope. They've lost their entire roster so far. There are a couple of their members have gone elsewhere. So, Galliardo's gone to Burning Core. I guess we'll touch on that a bit. Of course, some other members also finding place in the LJL. Not all of them yet, but we're not going to see the Miracle Run, the princess of the LJL, making their way to the ballroom. The Cinderella story is not going to be there this year, and at least not with those 5 members. Axis have signed no one as of this recording.
Yeah, or at least none that they have revealed to us is perhaps more telling. They may well have people, and they've just not announced their roster yet. So, I mean, that is always the disconnect, right? Is when do we learn what people they've got? But either way, I mean, it's effectively 20 days until the first match, as of recording right now. 23rd, I believe, is the first day of LJL action. And
so 10 days.
Sorry, you're right. Absolutely, it's 10 days, not even 20 days. You're absolutely right. I can't do maths, apparently. Moment of madness there. Yes. 10 days, like just over a week even. That's not a lot of time to give us some answers, and assuming they must have a roster by that point, you would have to think, or there's some serious alarm bells ringing. They're already ringing for us, frankly.
We also know their head coach left as well, so so much must be changing there. It also recently came. No, that's for new exciting rumors and drama to talk about. I'm not gonna reveal the hand too early. I want to keep that for a moment. But I mean, the last 2 teams to really mention here is the Hawks and Rascal Jester, lads.
So we talked about obviously Axis and a couple other things.
Yeah, I agree that I've got to keep.
So the thing is that the Hawks ended up picking up Corporal from the Axis support role, this guy that we probably rated him top 3 support in the region. They came out with a really good debut year. So honestly, looking forward to what's going to happen with this Hawks roster, because they've kept their core of Tussle and Dasher in that mid-jungle duo. That's one of the better parts of that team, and of course, from the summer roster anyway. So I'm really looking forward to what they do with also Afferman coming in from Sengoku up into their top side, and then the bot lane, they picked up Zenit, who used to play in the region. They're back, and they're filling out this roster.
Well, I mean, Initialize, Rascal Jester, that's a complete mix-up now. We've got a rookie from the LJL scouting grounds. We've got a former pro player who retired, didn't play for a full split, has now rejoined in recap. And then we've got 2 CK veterans to a degree, you could argue, in the bot lane. And then you've got the Papa Hatcher Matcher, as I'm calling him now, because he's got a kid now, so I'm allowed to call him Papa, because that's how that works, I think.
Yeah, it's completely weird. It's a bit of an odd one in general, the fact that, Rascal Jesters, particularly in spring, had a little bit of something to them. They were mad scientists in a way. They had Ninja in the mid lane, who was, XWE, TDK even. I believe he was on that Renegades roster for a while as well. He's been around. He's been to some fairly serious international tournaments. He's also not been there. He was a bit of an interesting one. They had Art and Vivid in the bot lane, who were 2 of these veteran, excellent talents. Art in particular really impressed us. And then things kind of fell apart in summer, effectively with visa issues around COVID. And clearly coming into this year, they've kind of blown their roster up. And it's a little bit of a hard one to make a lot of. Obviously, Hatcher Metcher, we know and relatively highly rate. He's one of the better junglers in the region, at least one of the smarter ones. He's got some good early pathing to his name. Sol and Secret have both at points had some fairly high-end experience. I mean, they've both been playing in the LCK at some point. It's not necessarily on the best rosters.
But I mean, there comes a point, right, where you're just like, well, this is just a mishmash of players.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've seen good things out of Sol and Secret before, but I don't know how they'll be on this roster. And Recap and Kinatu particularly, one's kind of an ex-pro player who's coming back and hasn't played in a while, and one's an unknown. That's a risk, and especially in your solo lanes, that could be troubling, especially against the top half of the league, most of the league. So a lot of question marks, and we definitely have our worries, particularly around those solo lanes.
I think also a thing, just to kind of cap off this whole, because Lexi brought up with a really good point there, talking about it feels like a mishmash of players. That's going to be a really big thing in terms of my understanding of these teams before, and of my analysis of these teams before heading into the spring split, is what kind of identity do we think these teams are going to have? Some teams, like, spoilers, Sengoku are probably going to have a pretty clear identity. They're going to be very aggressive, probably. Whereas Rascal Jester, kind of hard to tell. You don't know whether they instinctively fit together as a team. So that's going to be really interesting to see how all these teams shake up on a more, feeling it out level.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of different layers in which these teams and how they're going to cross over, their macro, their style, their gameplay, cultural identity as what within the team itself. There's going to be a lot of questions moving through, and we're going to, because of this, we know what 2 of these teams are going to be like. Really, we know what Burning Core, we know what DFM. We're not going to touch on them too much because we're going to talk about them in the next episode, as Initialize already said. But coming into 2021, we're all looking at 6 of the 8 teams I think it's going to be like this, but we'll have to figure it out. I'm going to very quickly rally you, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there, some of them, through a full list of who's left the LJL. Now, there is an asterisk. We don't know anything from Axis, as we've already made clear. So I might say a few names in this episode, and the next episode we have a roster, so just please be aware. From Axis, we haven't got any placement for Natsume, Hogler, Unyan, and Day 1. For Burning Core, Yujio and Rocky. Rocky hasn't come back. Yujio has just been let go. CGA, Unica / Yoshi, both the junglers that were, one of them was a rookie, one of them had played around in the LJL for a while. Nothing about them at the moment. For DFM, we know Off Air has left, but that was partly due to actually On Air. My apologies.
He's now Off Air.
He's now Off Air. We do know that happened partly due to actually him getting married and wanting to get married before COVID hit, and his plan was to do a bit of both. But congratulations over to him, and we do know some of the substitutes over for DFM have left as well. For the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks Gaming, oh man, it feels good to say that about. We got Adam, Honey, and Pooh have all been let go. As we know, Honey and Pooh were rookies coming into this, so pretty sad. Adamic had played around a bit, was less of a rookie, but still pretty new to it, so sad to see that. Rascal Justice Pink has been let go. A mid laner that actually did show some promise, but we're not sure what's going to happen with him. Art, Nagi, Ninja, and Vivid are all missing in action at the moment, and we don't know anything about them. Sengoku Gaming, we have lost Blank, Period, and Yutori-Muashi. And for V3, we have Boogie and Archer. There's a lot of big names, gentlemen. I want you to start keying in on some of the bigger names you want to make a note of.
For sure. I think the big one for me, generally speaking, is like we mentioned it before, that Sengoku cashed out last year. And 3 of those massive names were 2 ex-SKT players. Hell, Blank was a world champion with them.
Yeah.
That was a ridiculous mid-jungle duo. And then also Yutori-Muashi was effectively royalty in the AD carry position here in the LJL. He was Utapon's rival. He was the second best AD carry for a long time, even in the last year. He had a rough summer split. It wasn't the best split ever, but he was genuinely still looking very, very talented. Yeah. He's decided to call it a day. And I think in general, there's been a lot of our top AD carry players have stepped away this split. We've lost Yutori, we've lost a couple of others, and that's a big loss for us.
I think it's worth again, we won't spend all this time on all the players, but I think particularly for Yutori-Muashi, who has been, as Sam said, amongst the upper echelons of the LJL Thailand, both in terms of skill and also affection towards this player. He's got a great fan base. Was so huge for the LJL. So losing this guy, and remember, you said he was a rival to Utapon. Remember, Utapon's role swapped down into AD carry. Yutori-Muashi was kind of like the best AD carry in the region uncontested, but before then, really. So I think his spring split, wonderful. Summer was not obviously what he wanted it to be. It's very sad to see him go, though, and Sengoku will be left a bit sad with that.
Yeah, Yutori honestly was royalty, and if potentially, gentlemen, we had been covering more, we would do a bit more of a bigger send-off, like a video or something. But for us, we know of his history, but we didn't live it, sadly. But you can still respect your elders going through. Great Smash Brothers song, by the way. Respect Keck W. If you know it, you know it. Pyrrhian is also a pretty interesting one. He's now a free agent and still hasn't been picked up. We know LCK has started today of recording. So that's definitely interesting. And Blank, well, he's now on KT roster, so congratulations over to him.
Yeah, and like we saw him over in Casper Cup as well, and he looked pretty good, frankly. Like he was pulling off some nut stuff on Lee Sin and the like. So yes, KT have a little bit to prove with the rest of the team, and I know they had a rough start to the season today, but you know, Blank himself has got another chance as a starting jungler in the LCK, and you know, when he's had the chance, he's done pretty well.
Do we see him on that roster? I thought he played in All Star. I don't know whether we've
actually seen him on the KT roster. Was it All Star? Sorry,
he played on the LJL All Stars, and
that's where it was. You're right. Thank you.
Yeah, Blank.
Whoops, wrong one.
Yeah, but anyway, I really hope Blank ties it up in the LCK because he had a real resurgence over in the LJL. I know obviously his 2018 split on SKT was not great. You know, he didn't have the best send off from that team, but Blank had a really good resurgence here. We loved watching him play. So to see him go, we send him off with the best intentions.
And he did spend a full year and a half in the region, so it's kind of not surprising that it's now paying off a little bit in dividends for that. And I'm not trying to shade any players that have gone against that. And weirdly enough, we're going on to Archer and Boogie, gentlemen, because we have to. We're not going to talk about too much around that, but this is a big blow. Archer was seen as one of the most promising AD carries, especially at Worlds. You had the Met Lights of Yamamoto Cannon praising Archer and his ability, and Boogie was, well, while he had a disappointing Worlds performance, really, regardless, he changed the LJL straight up just through what he did.
His Lilia destroyed the region. As soon as that champion was out, it was permanently banned away from him, effectively. He had such a wide champion pool for the jungle player across that year. He was, and every single pick he could make work. It was the kind of thing where, like, in spring, he struggled to find what champions his team needed because he could play everything. But as soon as his team kind of like adapted and integrated this player into the roster, they were completely unstoppable. And in summer, they took home the crowns, and largely that was due to Boogie.
I think I have two kind of moments of sadness when it comes to Boogie, really. One, that he never really got to prove how great he was on the international stage at Worlds. I think, you know, obviously
still hasn't
have the best showing there. Yeah, exactly, and that's a bit of a blow for him, I'm sure, because actually he was genuinely very, very good. So just in terms of how smart he was, not just beyond his mechanics and the rest of it, which was a little bit of a shame we didn't get to see that on the international station. 2, he never got to pull out his Evelyn, which I was like dying for him to pull out at some point. This guy is a genius Evelyn player, and he just never pulled it out, even when she came into meta. And for me, that was a really sad moment.
It really was. I mean, notable other players that we haven't got here anymore is obviously Art, Ninja, and Vivid are all currently missing. We went digging because there was rumors that potentially they're on military leave or they had been held up due to COVID restrictions, but all of that within reason now should have passed. If they weren't playing the LJL, they should be in Japan. So unless they're playing on Axis at this point, they're not going to be here. And Vivid was a Japanese resident, which is the big commodity that if he's not on Axis and they don't have a 3 Korean roster, that's wild.
Yeah, it is. It was also being like on some of the top teams in the LJL, right? Like he has been on people like DFM, like he's been on V3, like he's been around and about and been very, very good. He's paired with Yuto Mayashi, he's paired with Art, like some of the best AD carries, and looks, generally speaking, on things like Nautilus and like, generally pretty good. It wasn't the easiest year with Rascal Jesters, but you'd think it wouldn't destroy his reputation entirely.
Heck,
and he certainly wasn't the weakness.
Wasn't it the bot lane for 2019 summer in the finals, against DFM, so the V3 team versus
was.
Wasn't that Yutori Mayashi and Vivid? They were very strong in that split too.
Absolutely. I mean, and the other things, like, again, we talked about Archer, but Art as well not being reached. That's a 3rd top-tier AD carry. Hell, our top 4 AD carries from last year, I think, if we speak about it, lads, is what? Yutapon, Yutori Mayashi, Archer, and Art. 3 of them are now gone, as far as we can tell. One's retired, and 2 don't have a team right now.
Gango's in and amongst them, but not top 3, but maybe 4th or 5th.
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be a huge change. Are there any quick names that you just want to rattle off here and just give them a little bit more of a note? Obviously, I've already said huge change of rookie players just getting in their first opportunity and then kind of thrown to a side. I will be coming to that topic very briefly, but far later in the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I've been a huge fan of Pyrion in 2020. I think that as a mid laner, he had really good fundamentals, is the word that we used to at the entire year. He was just very good at all the basics. Biggie, we talked about more than enough throughout the entire year. Gonna be sad to see him gone. Art, man, I really hope that Art gets picked up because he's one of the best AD carries in the region again. Honestly, everyone that we mentioned, obviously, we put them there for a reason. I guess the other one is the coaches of On Air. We talked about them leaving and Zandark leaving. I wish we got to see them stick around a bit longer. Zandark being one of he's a Korean coach who came over and coached for the Hawks. Would really like to see these guys put down their roots and see if they could instill some kind of ideologies within the LJL scene. But of course, now we won't get to see that from those 2 individuals, so it's sad to see them go.
Yeah, I think perhaps a bit of a shout. I'm sure Lexi will talk about the rookies later on, but I think it's a little bit sad to see some of the rookies kind of thrown to the wolves and then immediately dropped. I think
UGR
obviously Burning Core. Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously Burning Core picked up Gary Ario, and I think that's a sensible call. But I think it is a little bit sad to see that UGR's not around anywhere. But that speaks a little bit to the fact there's not the greatest developmental scene in the LJL either. So there's lots of stuff around there. So I think pour one out for the rookies, I think, is perhaps I would say. So Aramek, Pooh, Honey, Yujo, and some of the others I'm obviously not mentioning right here.
The guy that got really screwed over.
Oh, poor guy. He was not ready.
No. He got so screwed, and I feel so bad.
He played Katarina and Malzahar. That's which is that was a trip, I tell you.
At least like you said, Initia1ise, he had the moment where he got the double kill on DFM and it was solo, and they can never take that away from him. They lost that game, but at least he still gets the highlight moment.
Is anyone else hearing random bits of Benny Hill theme music going on?
Let's run away from Benny Hill, and let's actually, on a more positive note, gentlemen, let's quickly talk about a few of the players that have been that are going to be filling that void of players leaving or just not available anymore in the LJL. In the case of Yutori Mayashi, we've got Crash, Mujin, Kasin, who was AKA Big Shot or was the DRX rookie. We've got Hollow, Zenit, Milan, who's a rookie from the LJL Scouting Grounds, Nechion. I don't quite think I'm pronouncing that. It wasn't too bad. We got to Kintanu as well for the top lane of Rascal Jester. There's a bunch of new players, both pseudo experienced or having lots of experience, or they're brand new rookies, really.
Yeah, so I think the big name for me is, of course, Crash coming into the region.
Huge.
Because I remember, I was a huge LCK fan back in like 2014. So I started watching Pro League Legends 2014. 2015 through 16, 17, I think I watched about every pro game there was in the major regions. So I saw Crash's debut. I think it was on the Longzhu team back then. Very aggressive jungler. Hopefully carrying on in the same line as someone like Peak Blank, who's just left the region, and of course Boogie, who's just left us too. So I'm really hoping Crash will bolster some of the jungle talent here.
To jump on that, Muujin is also joining, and Muujin, in Boogie's career, they had almost identical careers. The only difference is Muujin had done everything that Boogie couldn't do.
Oh,
when I mean it, we're talking. Muujin was a part of the last roster for the Flash Wolves that actually made it to Worlds. Boogie came in and they couldn't do it. So I mean, jungle diff, right? Muujin's just better, right? Matches don't change.
I mean, V3 pick up another Flash Wolves jungler. He's another Korean Flash Wolves jungler. And as far as we know, from what I remember of Muujin and what we've seen of him when he was on the international stage, has been relatively impressive. He's in a similar sort of aggressive vein, like having a look over some of the things he's played as well. Like, this guy's played a lot of different champions over his times as well. Looks like a pretty exciting pickup. And, we should be sad Boogie's not around, at least from, like, a competitive point of view. But, he's another Lee Sin god. He's another Nidalee god. He's someone to at least keep our eyes on.
And then we've got the end of this trifecta of junglers coming in, because there's this name Cassin, also known as Big Shot, who was on the DRX rookie squad, has come over to the LJL to make their time in the big leagues, or at least in the LJL. I mean, it's not Korean Challenger, it's not the LCK, but of course, a great many pros have managed to find their resurgence here or find their foot in the door. So Cassin, when we've talked about so many of these junglers leaving the region, might find himself a bit of a wedge to put in that aforementioned door.
Indeed, he could literally follow the Boogie roadmap of go to the LJL, start your career, go to another region, go to the next tier, come back to the LJL, then go to Worlds. Like, that's Boogie's career. He joined the LJL and actually made a staple for himself. So hopefully that's a start of better things to come, and the jungle role won't fall into a weird place. We've got a few other players, but I'm sure we'll be covering them in more detail later in date, especially talking about next week's episode, where, guess what, ladies and gentlemen, if you think this is going to be a short one, next week's is going to be a far longer one. So that's why we're trying to keep this on the roll. Gentlemen, the revolving door. The LJL does have a problem somewhat with a revolving door. We don't seem to be able to keep hold of a lot of our talent, the talent that we can keep, while some of it is just the top of the cream of the crop. Some of it we just kind of lose, and it's like, that's really bad for the development of our region.
Yeah, I think it tends to be that the top 2, maybe 3 teams tend to keep some of their roster. DFM, for example, have kept a lot of their players. But particularly when it comes to imports, this is kind of like, it's one of two things. Either rookie players looking to make a name for themselves from Korea, or it's players who are or were good but had a rough split and haven't got picked up, looking to get some, first team experience in a league where they've got money and kind of remake a name for themselves, looking to move on. So people like Blank and Pyrian came over, right? Blank actually was over here for a couple of years, but now he's got an offer to go back to the LCK, and hell, he's going to take that. And that does become a bit of a problem, is when we do kind of rely relatively heavily on a fair amount of Korean talent. If that Korean talent then gets picked up for bigger and better things, they tend to leave without too much of a look back, and they come with a price tag.
Except for one very specific mid laner who we will definitely go on in a moment. Sorry, but Nymaera, please go. I'm teasing you. I'm sorry. I'm teasing you so much.
Right, no. So do you want me to save that one for later, or do you want me to?
Yes, please,
okay,
please.
Cool. Yeah, no. What I was saying is effectively like, it's kind of what I was saying about On Air and Zandark leaving. It just stops a lot of teams from putting down roots, and that doesn't just apply to the coaches and their ideologies and how they build up. It's also the players and the legacies they leave, I guess, because the LJL is not an ERL. It doesn't have an ERL system like Europe. It doesn't get to churn out ridiculous amounts of talent from a large player base of players. So the LJL losing players, and then also importing a lot of Korean talent, which aren't really looking to stay a lot of the time, it does become a bit of a problem. However, we thought 2020 was a real big step up in terms of the LJL's talent. I actually think that even though Worlds Plans was bit meh, obviously. There's a lot to build on from that. And looking forward, hopefully this new wave of talent coming in should still bolster us, even though the revolving door raises some issues with us.
Yeah,
Really?
I mean, like, before we go too much further as well, I have a quick point as well. Is like that there is also a bit of an issue in terms of why does this keep happening. Is the other thing is like every other minor region aside from VCS and PCS, they're not necessarily the same kind of level as us anyway. I mean, they are that kind of half step to a step ahead.
2 slots of Worlds.
They get 2 slots of Worlds. We only get the 1, and that does mean that it is you get everything or nothing when it comes to the LJL. And that means that if your roster does not succeed, you don't get to Worlds, you don't get to those international tournaments, you don't get the money and stuff that comes involved with that. And that does mean that rosters are kind of built to succeed for that year a lot of times. At least for, at least the organizations with money try to do that. And that does mean if they don't succeed, it's like, well, we're not here to grow, we're here to win. And there's only one spot that allows you to win. It's not like you can aim for 3rd or 2nd. It's not like you can try and climb your ways up to that. So that kind of hyper-competitiveness for winning does mean that we just blow up a roster sometimes.
But that is just being an emerging region. Like, that is kind of it. You have to prove yourself, and there is definitely a system like the VCS, where if you prove yourself on the stage, you'll get a slot.
It's also a big thing in the ERLs, where, again, mentioning back to them, so a big point with them, and I think it was the Mad Lions coach, or the ex-coach Mad Lions, who's now moved over to
Peter Dunn,
Peter Dunn, who was mentioning it, saying, well, it might be them, might be attributing it to someone else, but he was saying, well, the thing with the ERL is very quick to give spots to rookies or to new players, but they get 1 year or 1 split. If they get that, if they don't do anything in that time, they just kind of get chucked, right? We've seen that with a couple of people who've made like 1 or 2 LEC appearances and then just kind of get sent back into the meat grinder of the lower regions. The LJL definitely feels like that at times too. It is very much sink or swim.
But with sinking or swimming always comes rumors and drama along the way. And gentlemen, first things first, let's start at the very, very top. This isn't a rumor anymore. This is confirmed with a video. DFM's roster madness, Kazu, their head coach or former head coach, is now joining the ranks for the 3rd time in his career to play support. But alongside that, go on, Nymaera. I'll let you do the big announcement for the podcast.
So why is this important? It's because Kazu is a Japanese resident, which opens up, at least for the spring split, because Steel's becoming a resident later in the year, for DFM to have another Korean import, and one of my favorite players in the league just so happens to be one of those. It's the mid laner Arya, formerly of Crest Gaming Act, has joined Detonation Focus Me, and this is one of the hugest roster moves in LJL history. Make no mistake.
Yeah, big time. I mean, like that's the way to think about it, isn't it? I think, guys, it is a huge roster move, and part of that as well as they have kept Gang, and I know Gang is widely regarded as potentially the best support in the region. Hell, one of the best players in the region. I know Maple Street, for example, quite a famous
our go-to analyst on the region.
Yeah, he's one of those people who's quite vocal on Twitter and stuff, and really rates Gang. He thinks he's top 2 in the region. Alongside, I want to say, who does he think? Arya, isn't he? He thinks is the other one.
No.
Reiner, is it Reiner? No, I think
Arya
the top
says the top 2 players in the region.
Right, sure.
So not even just within his role. Like he really rates him. Like there's a few other analysts in a very similar mindset, and they basically said, okay, we want to play with Arya, we also want to play with Gang. How do we manage this and still have a budget to work with? So they've basically got Gang on retainer, and he's just not going to play until summer. So they've got Kazu in for spring, so they can have Arya in the roster. They've still got Seros signed as well. So there's this whole conversation about, well, are we going to get Seros in Gang? Are we going to get Arya in Kazu? Is Seros going to maybe try and play some? We'll get his karma down there. Like, so much madness to go on there. We have no idea how it's going to work out, particularly for spring, because there's a lot of talent here.
I believe in the Arya Blitzcrank. It's what Faker does, right? just yeah.
No. No, Blitzcrank is the only thing that counters Arya.
Oh, that
true.
That
is it.
Yeah.
If you can't beat it, join it. That's exactly it. Become the thing you swore to destroy.
I mean, this is a huge thing, as we've already really said. Arya, I think part of the reason personally why DFM probably made a big statement like this with Arya is we know that he was very active in behind the scenes and helping V3 in Korea, with finding scrimming partners, with helping Ace just get better at playing, and he was watching. It was very aware publicly that Aria was heavily invested into not just V3 doing well as an organization, but the LJL getting represented, and it was I think something like that where he's kind of making a statement going, I believe in this region, and maybe this team won't make it there, but I believe that this region can be there, and if I have to do it myself, I'll do it. And well, I mean, he's got the chops really, and he was arguably, I think, in our all-star team, he was the mid laner. So
for me, there wasn't really for me, it was more of a question of where do I put him in overall players rather than just players in mid lane, because he I mean, we'll talk about Aria so much in this split because I'm on the team of our little broadcast, and I love this player so much. He had a really good 2020, both spring and summer, even though Crest Gaming Act as a team struggled. They really struggled at points. Their summer, they had a really good run of form. They ended up finishing third, I believe it was.
Yes, and, almost second for the longest time.
They were second, and they dropped down to third for the
that last week.
But they were a team which was largely can Aria carriers, and most of the time was a definitive yes. So we'll have to see how he slots into DFM. And again, we won't go too much into that now because we only have so much time.
We do indeed. I just want to confirm for people, the belief is out there that Kazu and Aria, as initially I said, will be a pair, and Siros and Gang will be a pair. We don't know how often they're going to be playing. We don't know much more about that, but I believe a question has been asked about that for our own opinion, so we'll get into that a little bit later, gentlemen. Our next one is a bit spicier. This is actually a little bit of drama that's made aware. We will keep any of our sources
anonymous.
Anonymous, thank you. I was like oblivious, and I was like, that's not the term. But I mean, maybe it
throw in the bus and just don't let them know.
Yeah. And this is the rise of nepotism in the LJL, specifically around the AD carry role. This is dedicated to one player who we're going to just kind of dance around a little bit. But yeah, there is definitely a rise of nepotism in the LJL. And I think that partly, personally, gentlemen, makes sense. We've got a rotating door where those that get to stick around, they really stick a flag into the ground and go, no, I'm here, fuck off. And that's it.
Yeah, so again, like, this is a common sentiment within the scene, because we've seen a couple of players...
not just in the LJL.
Not just in the LJL.
In League.
In League in general. Of course, like, there are a couple of teams...
In esports.
Yeah, no, and of course, like, there is every chance that this is... there are a couple of times where someone isn't on a roster and you think, hang on, they're not very good, or wait, why are they getting a chance here when X player is available or whatever? And sometimes
that happens a lot in CSGO.
Sometimes it's about backroom, terms of like locker room atmosphere and stuff like that. That's not something which can be overstated. Sometimes it's their roles within a team house in terms of how they slot into the team and X, Y, Z. But sometimes it is people just like the player as a person, and therefore they get a bit of an easy pass. So we've heard this from a couple of people about a couple of players, and I think the one we're mainly talking about is Burning Core's Yuhi. He's had a very difficult 2020, and he's back for 2021 in the roster, and we had a lot of questions about him. We tone it down on broadcast because we want to be fair to people. We don't want to just be arseholes. Yuhi kind of sucked a lot of the time.
Oh, let's be real. If they listen to our podcast, we flamed him for a good 5 minutes at one point after. Like, we were like, well done in playoffs. You finally woke up. Good job. Where the fuck was that for most of this split?
Praise that for what it's worth. Had a really good playoff series versus DFM. They lost, but actually he was like, actually had a really good couple of games on Ash. Doesn't really shine a good light on the rest of the year, though, when he was losing lanes pretty much everyone on most picks.
Yeah, and let's make this clear. The guy is now into his third year of competitive play, and his 2018 and 2019 weren't all that impressive. Frankly, his 2020, he was often a liability on the squad. He was basically able to play Aphelios and Ashe to some extent, and everything else felt like a risk. He had a great playoff series versus DFM, make no mistake, and that was good to see, but the consistency really wasn't there. And that means there's kind of a lot he has to prove in the next year. He has to prove he is worthy of the starting spot on Burning Core. He has to prove he is worthy of being here in the LJL. He's got to prove that these rumours are just that they are rumours. And I do want to stress, that while this is coming somewhat from behind the scenes, it is effectively rumors. We do not have confirmation. We don't have access to any of the Burning Core staff members or anything like that. We're just kind of saying it as far as what we can see going around the community and what we've kind of seen from our own play, and saying, well, Yuhi struggled, he's still on the team, and there's rumors that perhaps he, is there for reasons that perhaps aren't necessarily to do with his performance. And if he wants to shake those rumors, he needs to step up.
Yeah, I mean, Yuhi has been kind of babysat by Proud for the last year, who was, in their own right, was having an incredible performance.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
As well was Once and Rayfaki, and for all the flack we have given Yu-Gi-Oh, he replaced Raki, who was a big shoes to fill, and he did a fine job doing it. It wasn't amazing, but it was worthwhile. It did okay against Tyros, and that's a veteran when it comes into it. Huge shoes to step in. He tried his absolute best, and I would argue that's the reason why Yu-Gi-Oh might have been thrown away, because they're like, well, Yu-Gi-Oh didn't work out, but we're going to keep Yuhi. Yuhi's a proven player. But it's like, well, is he really? If you just look at the raw stats on Game of Legends or any other website, you're going to see he was close to almost the lowest, if not the lowest, in a lot of important parts. But if you look at the isolated part of the DFM series, man, he popped off, and he had one of the best playstyles.
You could look at that series and think, oh, what are you talking about? But I mean, there was like 1 week in spring where Jinx Lysandra came in, and everyone was like, wow, is this the new combo? And we saw, I think Yuhi was on one of those teams that was playing it. Actually, I think it was Axis that was playing it. Anyway, there were it was in this kind of, we put a microscope onto a lot of the AD carries playing the Jinx in this kind of situation, be like, okay, what's your positioning like? And that kind of raised a lot of questions rather about a lot of the AD carries and how they were doing in team fights. And when we did that to Yuhi, it didn't look good. So from both a stats and our own subjective analysis of it, we had a lot of questions. He's still in, so this is not a good look for Burning Core as an org for us, really.
Yeah.
No, especially as Burning Core kept so many of their other parts. It's like that's the part you want to keep outside of what we've already identified. It's like, fair enough. Yeah. The org is allowed to do what they want to do at the end of it. So.
Like, he is a Japanese resident, and that's a big deal. But I mean, that may well play a part into it. But we have to hope he is there, because they see something in this player that perhaps we don't. But he has to step up and show it, and he has to kind of kick these rumors that it's nepotism that's keeping him there in the ass, really.
Exactly. But let's not stay on that too long, because we actually have less confirmed, but it's more confirmed, really, through what's happened. Boogie and Archer have left the LJL. Now, if you look over on their Leaguepedia pages or anywhere where you track the pros, we know that Boogie is now playing in the LLA, I think, right? But Archer has been and is still teamless, and he's a free agent with the LCK and CK now starting. He's not a part of any of those squads over in Korea. The LJL is soon to be starting, and still nothing there. Yeah. And a lot of his tweets and stuff around on the internet, most recently, which was about last year now, well over a month and a half ago now, was in Japanese and Korean. So let's talk about what happened. So at the end of Worlds, Boogie and Archer returned with the team to Japan. It is then made out, we have no confirmation, but it's made out that Boogie and Archer refused to do contracted appearances after their Worlds appearances. This is partly to do with the fact that V3 are an organization that are owned by the university, owned by a university. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they are they are funded purely through that, and it's when they were looking for their academy rosters and new team thing that came up about 3 months ago now. It was all they had to sign up to the school in part to join their academy system.
Owned by Kobe High Tech School.
That's it. Yes, thank you.
Airline college as well, by the looks of it. Interestingly.
So V3 said you needed to make an appearance with the mayor of the local constituency, who congratulated V3 on making Worlds. They also said you needed to do a TV or kind of recording appearance, and you also had to do an appearance at the school itself. It's believed that Archer and Boogie didn't do any of this. And if you want to check out any of V3's interviews and everything, the moment you see Paz stop doing them is when their contract also had expired. Paz did his contractual obligations and then left V3. Apparently on very good terms because of everything, considering everything. He was also partly the person that brought the team together, so apparently it was very good for him. But Archer and Boogie, obviously Boogie started his career in the LJL, really. He made a name for himself before going to the PCS. And Archer was a rookie with huge expectations placed upon him. He rose to those, went to Worlds, had a disappointing performance, but obviously everyone was still very high on his ability.
Honestly, Archer was probably the player with the best average performance out of the whole V3 lineup, actually.
Yeah.
So again, he had himself an okay international showing compared to the rest of the players on V3.
Yeah, and with that, with them not signing to do any of the agreements, it's believed that Boogie was kind of like, lol, I'm not doing any of that, and kind of peaced out, expecting to receive a lot more offers. After only getting really a few other minor region ones, it seems like he went over to the LLA because it was the most appealing. It also happened to be the spot where Jose Diodo actually has now gone over to the LCS. He's now taken his old spot, and I think the idea for Boogie, now he's like, well, now I have an idea to get myself to a major region. Apparently Korea's not interested in me. I'll go a different way. Archer has been left to the wolves by Boogie, and it's really sad to see this whole thing play out.
Yeah, it is, because we were talking about what was I gonna call it? In terms of the whole nepotism thing, right? Relationships with teams, with orgs, with various personalities within them, and the respect that you show them is gonna carry a lot of weight, right? So if you're gonna shirk responsibilities, according to these are, and again, like, this is coming from like behind the scenes to some people reporting it or tweeting it or whatever, then that's been translated to us. There's like 3 or 4 different ways it can go wrong. But
okay, it is. Chinese whispers being played there,
if it has come across as the fact that that it was a disrespectful thing to do, that's going to weigh pretty heavily in the LJL.
Plus any coaches that get talked to and everything else, right?
Yeah. And we know that because there's this whole revolving door, there's a lot of close ties between a lot of the teams because there are so many frequent changes between them. So yeah, it is going to probably weigh upon these players' careers quite heavily if they were going to plan to keep going on in the LJL, and that's a real shame because they have impacted our league so much.
Yeah, not to dwell on it too much more, but I mean, if it kind of hurts as well. Maybe you might have gotten away with that in Europe or maybe in North America,
I think that's fair.
Where it's a little bit more individual, but actually respect for your company, respect for your contracts and your elders is a big deal in Japan. Hell, it's a big deal in Korea, and avoiding those contractual obligations allegedly really doesn't look good, and especially for kind of 2 foreigners in there, you're taking up an import slot. It does not look good, and it kind of looks like you're snubbing the LJL Japanese culture in general.
There's also the other chance that, of course, they've left because they felt they were hard done by, and then the people left with the microphone are the people who are on the team, so they come out with that message. So either way, it's probably either way. The thing that we can probably say from all this is that they've not left on good terms, and that means that it's going to be hard for them to continue a career in the LJL. That's what we actually know. Well, that's what we can more safely assume, without putting any blame anywhere.
That's massively true. Yeah, exactly. And there are other bits going around there, but the rest of that is very much kind of hearsay. So as far as we know, they've got into. There's been some discord there between them and the various organizations.
I mean,
particularly
to round it up, it's just sad that it ended like this, and that it was just God. If they had just done the interviews, I understand it would have been extra week or 2. And the problem is, I understand during COVID and everything else, things are very stressful. But it's it happened, and those bridges have definitely now been burnt, at least with V3 for the moment. And obviously, as we have said before, Axis haven't announced their lineup. There is a chance that Archer could be picked up by them.
Archer and Vivid, please.
I mean, that'd be great. And then Axis suddenly looked like they could actually be fighting for a spot. But with us now announcing everything that's been happening, we won't be bringing these topics up too often, but it is worth of note to bring you some of the LJL news from a bit wider field that we normally do. Gentlemen, now that we've seen all of the changes and everything, what are we looking forward to seeing? What are we hopeful to see? Who do we think's going to pull it off? And where do we think things are going in the future?
Okay.
Get going.
So I think the big thing is that it has been effectively 2 worlds in a row. Those are the last 2 international events that didn't look particularly great for the LJL. And part of the frustration there has been that our teams have gone and we've said, hey, there's people like Verdius and stuff. Hey, these guys have got something to them. There's good macro sense along with some decent micro. The problem is they've then kind of, once they've hit that international stages, they've stopped playing the style we've known them for. And it was really true of V3. And what are we hoping to see change is that actually people come back once again and they follow that old school Yamato Cannon speech and say, play your style and please take what you've taken and go and play it this time. V3 kind of did it for 1 game, tried it a second, lost, and then panicked, it felt like, at Worlds 2020. And I really want to see that change. I wanted to see that not be the case in 2021, whoever goes.
So what I'm hoping to see change is confidence. And that comes in a different couple of ways, right? Because I think if we look at both DFM and then also in terms of their 2019 Worlds performance and then also V3 in 2020, bluntly, the LJL laners just got outlaned.
Yeah, they did.
Particularly Seros in 2019. Ebby was solo killing Vizicachi, someone who was really good back in 2019. I mean, he went on to dumpster FPX in one of those games in group stage, right? So DFM had some good performances, but particularly there's always like one lane that would fall apart. If we look at now, particularly DFM, their roster that they've got coming in, they have the strongest lanes in the region that we can really tell.
Oh, yeah.
Because, again, of course, V3 had a lot of... Ace, in particular, again, struggled quite a lot internationally. So hopefully Ari will be bucking that trend. And then having a team in the region which is so strong at laning and then uses that as a confidence point, right? Again, going back to that point, hopefully it will increase the entire region's ability to level up their laning game and then use that as a platform to do well internationally. So that's my thing to change.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem you will experience with that is when you are the best, you've got to try and find other challenges externally, and obviously
the
DFM will have that
problem.
Yeah. But
Massive
I mean, it will definitely bring up the LJL, and if DFM are so good for so long, for like a full year, they are de facto one of the best, similar to what we saw from V3, the region started to just look more and more competitive, right?
Hopefully. That's the idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like, and especially for things like Worlds, right? Like, I kind of have this race, and I know you guys share it. It's basically that, look, you must be this tall to ride the World's roller coaster. And if your laning stats don't hit that height requirement, don't hit that mechanical requirement, then there does becomes 2 obvious weaknesses for the best teams from around the world to exploit you. You might be able to cover it up regionally because that you can cover up those weaknesses because the other players aren't as good, aren't as talented, can't punish you as hard. That's just not true on an international stage. And bringing up your mechanical level to then be able to show off your macro muscles on top of that is a great call. That all assumes someone like DFM goes, but if they
well, if they don't go, then someone's shown they can beat them. So
exactly, and that's what we're hoping for, basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few different things that we could be expecting. Where do you think it's correct for people to set their expectations?
We had high expectations coming into 2020, and they were thoroughly dashed. So,
that's why I asked the question.
I have to say, looking at the talent moving out, I don't think the overall level of the region is increased. At best, it's like a net even, I guess, in terms of the talent going in and out. We have this whole we've kind of nucleated a lot of talent into DFM. They are the LJL super team. They always kind of were, but they definitely are now if they weren't before. So after V3 bombed out of play-ins, effectively I was saying, okay, if we're going to make it internationally, it has to be Aria plus DFM. I think that's the roster. I think which would do it. I even have the receipts and the tweets to show that, so you can go find them on my Twitter. But I think in terms of expectations, I think it's hard to say keep them high, but keep in mind that this is probably the best laning talent as opposed to any other LJL team that we've sent in the past that we've ever done. So that's the expectation we should come into. Good laning, but we'll see how that works against another UOL team or something like that.
Yeah.
God, we have to just hope that it works out that time round.
Yeah. So I think we have hope, I think, but it's a little bit more tempered this time out. We kind of saw the strengths of people like V3 and kind of undersold the weaknesses. And when they went and didn't play so much to their strengths, their weaknesses were exposed because they weren't able to lean on people like Boogie as much as they were in the LJL. And we're kind of hoping that a team, someone like DFM, are kind of currently, in our minds, I think, probably fair to say, the front runners with at least the talent on the roster.
Yes.
They would at least come with enough muscle to back up the Braids. I'm kind of hoping forward to see where that goes, even if our expectations are a little bit more tempered this time out.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair thing to say. Talking about the future, gentlemen, I'm going to just derail the podcast and take it onto my little soapbox.
Where's this soapbox come from? I don't know what's going on.
Let me just put my box down. I want to be even taller than I already am. And, gentlemen, the LJL is the only minor region that has been around for longer than 2 years, because I have to add that caveat with the PCS, that doesn't have an academy system at all. We did have one, and that's an important point to bring up. We have had it in the past. We had the LJL Challenger Series, which stopped at the end of 2018 when the LJL system changed, and they had a joint partnership opportunity with Riot Games, Yoshimoto Creative Agency, and PlayBrain. Once that started, things changed in the LJL, and most of that was the qualification system and how you actually stay around. You now just pay for a spot in the LJL. The problem is, a lot of these teams, specifically I'm going to call out Rascal Jester, have a full fucking lineup of substitutes in every single role, and they're great players. One of them I'll call out right here, right now, is Shakespeare. Shakespeare has been a really strong performer. Woman, by the way, 18-year-old, already got second in the U19 Esports Championships, which was an event only available to those that were under 19. They got second place in the Esports Beyond Shibuya Cup. The LJL, or Japan specifically, is currently seeing a huge rise in just secondary tournaments for Japanese players, for amateurs to play. We've got U19, I've already mentioned. We've got the Esports Beyond Shibuya Cup. We've got E-Elemental Cup happening. And these all happened in the last 3-4 months. I've been trying to keep my eyes peeled.
Too, right?
Scouting Grounds happened, and that's a whole nother thing. Scouting Grounds was an amazing performance. I watched every single game. The talent coming into Japan at the moment is actually legit. There is some promising figures. Sure, are they all there? No, of course not. That would be ridiculous to think about. Some of the players that qualified and played in Scouting Grounds were middling diamond players. So they're not the top of the top on the server. They might not even have a Korean account. But hey, some of them that did show up, I was really impressed with, and some of them are making their debut in the LJL split.
Back in Season 4, Yankos was a diamond player, right? Or whatever.
Exactly.
There have been players who don't necessarily grind it out in solo queue. It's not always a prerequisite. It helps. It doesn't always have to be a prerequisite.
But now that we are seeing so many organizers create their own tournaments where we're getting a lot of amateur players, currently there isn't really an incentive for any of the professional players, or there might be a non-compete clause within the LJL, so you can't see some of the professionals go down. It's just really fucking frustrating that we don't have this avenue and there isn't a clear way. It's like, do well in an amateur tournament and then one of the teams might pick you up as a sub. But we see so many subs get signed and then dropped and never talked about. Imagine if we had a challenger system where all of the 8 teams in the LJL had a second tier sister team that was just, okay guys, we're just going to have you guys pit it out. Most of you are already on your payroll already with us. If you're not, guess what? It's a Riot run event with PlayBrain, with the Yamamoto Creative Industry, you can bring everybody together and go, okay, great. We've got all of this going. These players are getting paid not a great amount of money, and I don't expect them to. But this is developmental talent finally coming back to the LJL, where you can bring these stars, and you can have full Japanese star lineups coming together. And in a year or two, you can develop this talent. Please, I know no one's listening from Riot, but if you are, please think about it, right, Japan?
Because there's two important things to because of course the LJL doesn't have a promotion relegation system. It's not franchised in the same way that the European League LEC or NALCS is, because it's not that same kind of partnership, but there is no promotion relegation. So as Lexi was saying, there is no way for up-and-coming talent like, say, a team like Sandbox or Griffin, the LCK, can make things work. But the whole thing about all the regions which are franchise tags of LCK, LEC, LCS now is that they have either enough money in the case of NA and teams like C9, TSM, and a couple of other teams.
Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks.
Yeah, but they don't have teams. We don't have a team like that which has had a history and also just an absolute deluge of coaching talent to stay in the regions, put down their roots. Again, a problem which I said about some of the coaches leaving, to really ensure that there is a good framework to train up these people. And yeah, one of the reasons, and now we see that NA is going to get, and of course NA has a whole problem with their own amateur talent too. But at least they're going to have themselves an academy system in the next year. LEC has the ERLs, which means, and we've already talked about that, a huge player base to draw from. LJL doesn't have either of those things. It's not going to be a team which has 3 world slots. It's not going to be a team which a region which has the most money to offer a lot of incentives. It's not going to. You're not getting paid pennies, but it's not going to be the same as China or an NA. There is also just no academy system. So yes, absolutely something which you need to harp on. So I'm glad you brought out the soapbox.
I will continue to do it because I'm passionate about, apparently, amateur Japanese events, apparently. That's what I've become incredibly passionate about. Scouting Grounds had a few of these players. Some of them that we don't currently know. Funa in the jungle, Mutton and Bubble were all amazing, as well as Popon. I just listed off 4 junglers that I'm like, if they had a year in an academy system, I would just love to see how some of these players develop. Dress Code was a great AD carry. There's so many kind of like Lunatic as well. Like I could keep going about this for a while, and you can tell that there are little pieces of talent all over in Japan. Exactly. And unless these players, if these players can't commit the time, but personally, if an org something was like, hey, we're going to pay you a little bit of money for each game you play, maybe a part-time job for a bunch of these players can suddenly come into something. And you know who actually fucking did that and went to Worlds last year? Fucking Reiner. He did that grind, and he's a proven person who went through the LJL Champions League, grinded his way up to the very top, made it into the LJL, went on to B3, got a rookie alongside him, and then went to Worlds. Like you've already seen someone do it. What more convincing do you want?
V3 as a team came through the Challenger Series, right?
They did.
They're in the league now. They've made it into the Partnership League, but they came from that Challenger Series. And, you know, we can talk about so many teams which have done that in various other regions.
But I'm gonna put away my soapbox. Let's get rid of that. Let's just yeet it over there, gentlemen, because we're starting to talk about the teams here. Initialize, you haven't spoken for a hot minute because I had the soapbox for a while. What are some of your hot tips for our lovely listeners out there on predictions?
So, obviously, we've talked about DFM, but that's not really a hot tip. Everybody's got their eyes on them, and absolutely you should too. Do yourself a favor, keep an eye on them. Other teams to keep your eyes on, though, top of my list, absolutely Burning Core. We'll talk about them more properly next time, but they have basically kept a lot of the roster from last year, particularly their 3 ace players. Not ace specifically, but their ace players. In Ray, Farkey, Once, and Proud. All 3 of them were carrying a lot of weight, it felt like, because they were struggling to carry from their AD carry and mid lane position. They have upgraded realistically in picking up Japanese resident mid laner Gariaru, who had a fantastic year, actually, honestly, on Axis, even though they had some difficulties in summer particularly, and he looked really strong. So they've got a stronger mid laning presence who can be another carry, and it means that some of the very obvious weaknesses that Burning Core had are no longer there, and that means that they can play to their strength a lot more easily and don't have to try so hard for the crazy plays that kind of threw away games that they once had in 2020. And I'm really looking forward to see what these guys can do with a strengthened roster and with still a lot of that kind of playmaking spice that they still had. So for me, that hot tip, very much Burning Core.
Okay, Nymaera, what's your hot tip for the ladies and gentlemen out there?
Right, okay, so it goes in a lot of different ways, right? Because I could just tell you, like, oh yeah, this is my other team, which I'm kind of putting up in the top echelons, but I guess in terms of my top tips, I'm thinking of which of these teams have again, as I was saying earlier, and I guess I kind of already preluded to that, right? In terms of what teams have a good identity, that's one thing, right? Because which of these teams have a lot of stuff going on, which you think?
Oh, I know who you're going to bring up now.
Yeah. And which of these have consistent carries, and also because okay, we'll do one thing, right? So Sengoku, I was talking about them earlier. They have Paz, Crash, Ramune, Gango, NT. Besides Paz. Particularly Crash, Ramune, Gango, that's a very aggressive team. That's a team where you're thinking they're going to be picking Graves, Gale Force, Kaiser, and some weird stuff in the mid lane.
Yeah.
So that's a plus point for them. A negative point for them is I don't know how consistent the carries are. So I'm thinking Ramune had a bit of a shocking spring, and then he wouldn't even get played in summer. He was a substitute on DFM for most of 2019 too. So I look at this team and also think, Paz played pretty well in the LJL, but kind of got a bit crushed in play-ins. He's never been the most flexible top player, a bit more role player. And then Gango is the most flip-flop player in the league, really. So I'm looking at Sengoku like, wow, really good identity. That identity's got some problems. So Sengoku, I'm definitely looking as more of a middle back of the team. So if I'm going to give you like a hot tip, I think about that for each of the teams. What do these players like to play? And how does that slot with everyone else on their team? And then also how consistent are they at doing that?
I mean, if you want a kind of second one from me, I suppose V3 as well.
Oh, no. One each. Oh,
okay.
Just all right. I'm cutting you there. I'm cutting you there. I get to do my one. You've already said it. Don't go into more. My one is actually going to be the opposite. I'm not going to be like, oh, this team's really good. I'm going to be actually a little bit of a negative Nelly because I love to be the person of the podcast. And my one is actually going to be, don't expect too much from this burning core. From this Rascal Jester roster. The reason I'm about this is their top laner was not, in my opinion's first round pickup top laner from the LJL Scouting Grounds. They are playing Kintanu, who was a great player in the LJL Scouting Grounds. Kanatu, thank you. He just wasn't the top of the top. He wasn't the cream. He was like the milk at the like that was coming almost into cream because it hasn't quite solidified for so long. I mean, it's got Hachimecha, so like that's a rock, but Hachimecha was always a rock. He wasn't the thing that you kind of go to. They've got exactly.
Recap's coming in his pathing.
Right, Recap's coming back, and he was never a standout player. He was never bad, but was never like, oh my god, Recap's gonna destroy everybody. He was like, he's like a third or fourth base player. Like, he's fine. He's good. Sometimes he pops off. A lot of the time he doesn't. I'm also really not sold on this bot lane. I'm really not sold on this bot lane. I would love to be proven wrong, obviously, but don't put many of your eggs into Rascal Jester's basket. This is not the Rascal Jester from spring 2020. This is a very, very different team. Management has changed. That's my tip, ladies and gentlemen. Don't put too much equity into Rascal Jester.
And if you apply my tips to this team, their identity is like yet to be discovered and needs to be forged. So spring is where they need to fill that out, and that's going to lead to them having a lot of bad games where they don't get it right. Having a double Korean bot lane in Solemn Secret, that helps. And we know that some of the AD carry talents left the region, so it's maybe not as hard as them as it is. I heard a little bit from a couple of people around the LJL Twitter saying that it's actually quite a strong bot lane, but that's yet to be seen on the Rift. So it has to work within a team atmosphere. So yeah, it is right to question them until they show up.
But with that, gentlemen, let's run into our question time. Question time is here, gentlemen. We have reached the end of our podcast, and relatively speaking, I think in half decent time, not the finest time, but reasonable so far. Our first question comes into one of the first people to join our Discord server, and if you would like to ask us questions, you can get your questions into us either through the Twitter DMs over to us over at the LJL Officially Unofficial or LJLOU over on Twitter. Or you can plug it over into our Discord chat, which we ask a few hours before, or sometimes a day before we actually do recording. Yeah, it depends. If normally I asked it, I do remember it and do it, but I was delayed in waking up this morning. So hey ho, let's get back onto it. Acclaimed. Hello, Acclaimed. We've had you around since the very beginning.
Love me some Acclaimed.
Very much so. He goes, how doomed is the jungle pool Keck W, the players that is, and this actually touches on something that we've talked about before regarding the pool of players in the LJL. What, gentlemen, very quickly, what's your thought on the jungle presence?
Go on, Sam.
I think we should be okay, honestly, because we've still got Steel, who has been a great jungle player for many, many years and still looks that good. We've still got Once, who impressed me a lot. He was quite exciting. Still, I think Tussle, like, this is a chance for a bit of redemption, but he's historically been pretty good. Jametra has his moments. And then the two new kind of people I've got my eyes on, particularly Crash and Muujin, have both been wonderful, aggressive junglers before. Muujin in particular, I think Crash is very, very true to his name, very feast or famine. Muujin is a little bit more consistent, but he's another one of those kind of flash wolf superstar junglers who I think should be pretty good with the current meta in the jungle in my eyes.
So on one side of things, we lost Biggie, we lost Blank. That's a real big hit. On the other side, I mean, Axis had a lot of difficulties in the jungle with Hogler. Of course, we don't know who they're signing again for this year, so we don't know if we're going to get a bit of a jungler that's going to struggle, or a rookie jungler that needs to be proven yet. And also, Crest Gaming Act had a lot of struggles from their jungle, right, with both Yoshi and Unica not really hitting the mark. Actually, going on to that course, that was the team with Arya on it, and Arya was a very important part of that mid-jungle TV2. I actually think the mid-jungle TV2s this year, pretty good. So in terms of like the jungle pool itself, yeah, the players themselves might not be at the same level. I think the situation that each of the junglers has found themselves in, though, maybe a lot better. Ace, very supportive of their jungler, so I think Muujin's going to slot in pretty well there. Steel and Arya, really good at playing around pressure. Initia and Kassan are both a Korean jungle duo, mid-jungle duo coming in for Crest Game Ranks, so they're probably going to be pretty set. Burning Core has Gaudiado in the mid instead of Yu-Gi-Oh, who's more proven, more solid, right? I actually think the mid-jungle TV2s gonna support the jungler better than last year, but the overall talent of the jungler is maybe slightly less.
Fair. I think that's a fair assessment to make. We've got Rook, who actually wants to follow up. Hello, Rook. We might be hearing from him occasionally on our cast, depending what happens.
Heck yeah.
To follow up on the jungle question, do we feel the jungle pool is more skewed to tank / supportive picks, I'm guessing, or do we think it's more towards carries? I'll throw this over to Nymaera for this one.
Carries. You watch LPL, you watch the LCK, all of Casper, Ultimacia, it's all about enabling your jungler still. Because jungle items aren't a thing anymore, and your jungle item, you don't have to sink that money into it. A lot of junglers are better in the late game, so even stuff like Gordrink, Asterix, Olaf doesn't fall off nearly as hard as it was. Talia is back, Graves is back. It's a lot of carries.
Yeah.
So Nymaera, Initialize, you must be happy about this. Some of your farming junglers are still really meta.
Big time. I mean, like, we've still got those kind of big ticket names from the 2020 World Championships. So Graves, Nidalee, Lilia, still kind of around and about. On
Lilia's
top
not
of that,
there's here anymore, but still around.
No, she's still around, exactly. She's not at the same S.
Probably where she should have always been.
Yeah, and then there's people like Hecarim and Kindred hinting around the corners as well. But there's kind of two other picks that. Yeah, exactly. And there's these two other picks that pick the drinker up in Olaf and Pantheon, who are on top of that, who are way more aggressive, way more bloody. They kind of don't fall off quite as hard because just Gordrinker is nuts. And so they're very much in around hell. I think at the minute we've only, of course, got limited regions and stuff to choose from, but out of the presence we've got right now, Olaf is 86% presence, Pantheon is 81% presence. They are the two highest presence junglers in the game right now in the competitive scene.
I love that Pantheon can still be played in 4 different roles at the moment. We all know that my favorite thing about League of Legends and watching the LJL was actually not watching the LJL. I was watching how they draft. I didn't care about the games. I did, obviously, but oh man, it's going to be cool to see that. Lots of options here and more continuous things to see. So players like Once, like Steel, who have proven themselves in this environment in the LJL, are going to continue to thrive. Where I think personally we might have some question marks for some of the players who typically have a bit more of a farming style or a more supportive element, but we'll have to see how that goes. Garu is the best shark. If you have a virtual YouTuber preference, I'm not actually doing it. It's their username. I'm just quoting here. No offense to anybody out there. I ain't getting involved in VTuber drama, mate. Like that stuff's insane. Lovely community, though, by the way. Actually, great memes. What do you guys think of Arya? What do you think Arya brings to DFM that might shake things up for you? Oh, and also, do you think they start the split with Syros or Arya, as it's not been confirmed.
Okay,
who wants to take this one first?
I'll give a couple of quick points just so we can rattle through that first bit. What does Arya bring to DFM? A whole lot of stuff. One is a champion ocean, and what does that mean? You can leave your red side draft to red 5 and just say, can Arya's champion pool counter this entire composition? Because that's what Crest Gaming Act did for most of.
I was thinking that.
So that's a really big thing. He's a massive playmaker. I'm going to give a flip side to this. He's not a massive control mage player. He plays some Azir, but his Orianna has been lacking from his pool, so that's something which actually he won't bring to the team, just in case you want a bit more depth on that. But he brings so much carry playmaking potential whilst also just winning lane. He's a consummate professional from that mid lane, so expect him to bring quite a lot to DFM if they incorporate him well.
Yeah, and speaking of incorporating him well, I think that second part to your question, Ogura is best Shark. Who do we think starts? I think the reason they have got Kazu in as a player is so they can start with Arya.
Why else would they sign him, right?
Right. Exactly, and that's that's why they've done it. That said, they've still got Seros on the roster, and so if things start going a little bit sideways because Kazu just can't stand up, then probably what happens is they bring Seros back in and Gang back in to stabilize things. They've got that in the backseat. But I think the plan is to get Arya in and acclimatize as soon as they possibly can, and have kind of Utapon and Kazu play weak side, which is honestly not a bad thing to do when you've got Ebby and Arya as your solo lanes.
There is some value to switching in and out those duos too, to give Gang stage time in spring, because he's a great player, don't get me wrong, but it's still nice to have him playing with at least 3 out of the 5 pieces of the roster that we expect the summer roster to be, with Arya just replacing and then Gang being on the roster because Steel's a resident at that point. So I think there's some value to having both duos playing if we think that they're swapping in and out, just to make sure that they're all kind of fresh.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pros and cons. I mean, this is also going to bring in the big question of Syros, obviously eventually leaving DFM or staying on DFM, but he has been one of the poster childs of the LJL. He's one of the big kind of faces for any form of marketing for DFM / the LJL in Japan. He is a known figure and is one of the best. He is arguably the second most beloved player behind his teammate Ebby, who has got an incredible story of his own before joining the DFM. Utapon is the other player, but Utapon has kept himself a bit more out of the limelight just because that's who he is as a person. So, I mean, these are some incredible players, and we all knew eventually their time must come to an end, but it's believed currently that Syros might be going into a different esport at this point in time.
I mean, I know Lexi loves bringing this up, but I think Syros is only behind Faker for the longest tenure on a single team of League of Legends player.
Utapon also
is like a day behind him. It's like a day behind.
Yeah, Utapon and Syros are both up there. So for Syros to leave, it would be a really big thing, because DFM just don't change players that often anymore.
No, and it would be an end of an era, and also that fight against Faker, who isn't starting for T1. It's like, for how?
Yeah, it hurts me, dude. It hurts me.
It's like, how much longer is Faker gonna hang around until he goes into something? Hey, it's got to happen at some point. LeBron James. I mean, Michael Jordan retired. Michael Jordan retired, so eventually Faker will have to retire, and then
he might come back. You never know.
I mean, Perks.
That's my
Perks and Caps are now like, that's a thing, lads. Like, ooh, who's the GOAT now in the mid lane? Anyway, let's go on over to our final question, which comes from Kozlovov, PBE? Korsakov. Okay. Asking a repeat question, sadly. What do we think the strengths of weakness? Actually, no, it's slightly different. What do we think about the strengths and weakness of each of the DFM rosters, assuming that Syros Gang is a pair and Arya Kazu is a pair? And their second question is, which rookie are we most excited about? So I'm happy about that one.
Okay. So I'll start with some. Basically, in that I think it's the difference is kind of is, do you rate synergy and a stronger playmaking bot lane, or do you just want raw carry potential? Because what you effectively are trading in is arguably one of the best players in the LJL in Gang, or are you going for one of the best mid laners in the region as well, one of the best players in the region in Arya? It's kind of, what are you after? What are you looking to do? And which one's kind of working for you? There is a kind of weight of history and synergy with the original roster of Syros and Gang, and that will always help, particularly earlier on in the splits, where you can fall back on just knowing these players and how they work for years and years and years. On the other side, Arya is just really good. And as long as Kazu isn't like losing you lane hard, Utapon's a very good weak side player.
Oh,
and there is a world where
Gango and Grendel occasionally just running it down, so
yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah, exactly. And he would basically, actually, honestly, he's had to play weak side quite a lot anyway, because Ebby tends to want attention, and top side is how they've wanted to play with the likes of Nidalee before. So honestly, I think the difference is largely, are you looking for raw carry potential and topside play, or are you looking for stability and playmaking out of your support?
I'll go for it from a slightly different option in terms of champion pools. Way more assassins out of Arya. Seros just doesn't really play them. Less control mages out of Arya, so you're not going to have a Heimerdinger, Orianna, Zillion. So Arya's not really going to be playing the supportive kind of picks, so he doesn't play Galio and stuff either. He will be playing stuff like Aurelia, LeBlanc, all of his crazy carries. His Akali's nuts too, even though his team didn't know how to enable it all the time. You know, he's just a very mechanically proficient player.
Almost pulled it, if only there wasn't for that damn Blitzcrank and the dumb dog.
Wasn't that the Silas? That was the Silas game, wasn't it?
And
yeah, Silas is also ridiculous, by the way. So I think, but then on the other side of it, by putting Arya in over Seros, and don't get me wrong, I think that Arya is a really good player to put in over Seros in a lot of situations. You're losing stuff like Gang's Rakan, Gang's Bard, Gang's Thresh, Gang's a lot of different picks. The question is Kazu going to be able to do what Gang can do? Because while Arya will occasionally just win you the game by himself, Gang can kind of do the same. So there's a lot of different ways to look about this from a champion pool perspective too.
I personally am very interested to see kind of, do you want to go with what worked or past tense worked? Because obviously in summer, DFM, their rails came completely off. They ended up losing to almost everybody at one point. They almost lost a game to fucking Axis, who, no offense to any of those players,
they should have done, actually. It was
they probably should have, but like, no offense to Axis, but at that point, that was when Axis was starting their run to actually come back in after going 0-8, and DFM got pushed really hard by them, which, I mean, the players of Axis,
they almost lost to Rascal Jester too,
right? They need to pat themselves on the back for almost doing that. Arya can just win a game, and we've been proven to do this. So personally, I think the strengths of Arya over what losing what Seros and Gang brings is actually Arya can just put a game on his back, and he had to do that for a full year in the LJL. Not being able to rely on maybe his bot lane always winning lane, or actually half the time losing lane, and then his jungler just being AFK. He still found ways of winning games, and it was like, well, if he can do that already, what about when you've got the best AD carry? Or actually, to quote Paz, there's only two men I'm scared of in the LJL, and Utapon and Ebby are those. Everybody else, and Arya was there as well, actually.
He said there were two people he didn't know the ceiling of in the LJL, and that was Utapon and Arya. It's like, I genuinely don't know how good these guys can get. And
he doesn't like playing against Ebby either, so it's
who does, honestly, in the LJL?
Yeah. And I mean, Ray Farkey's okay with it, because he actually will go to town against him. But that's where I'm going. Gentlemen, do you want me to start off with who I think the most exciting rookie is coming into this
one, actually.
So I'm not going to pick the rookie that is obvious to pick, because it would be a certain jungler who I'm going to leave to my co-host here to fight over. But actually, my most excited player or carry actually is actually on their same team. It's Milana. The reason I'm excited is because the way they popped off in Scouting Grounds is he just 1v9'd one game as an AD carry. It was kind of absurd. He ended up, at one point, it was correct for him to Jhin ult inside the enemy base get a double kill. And then it was like, what are you doing? He then rotated around, got another kill there, and it's like, this guy's mechanics are just so high. Really, and if he can transfer half of that mechanical talent into pro play, which is a completely different beast, my God, Cross Gaming Act might have a really good bot lane carry, which hopefully that saves them from their support player, who I'm still not sold on.
Sure. Do you mind if I go next then? I'll let you take up the very last bit. So I'm actually not going to go for Cassin. I'm actually going to go for Hollow, technically, because Hollow, even though they've been around in the pro scene for a while, never played in a top flight league. They played in Challenger Series in Korea for a while, played a couple of Casper Cups, never played in the LCK, never played Major Region tournament in terms of like the regular split and stuff at all. So this guy Hollow has been around playing as some of the best players in the world, you know, either in team houses and scrims. Of course, he hasn't really been able to prove himself on the LCK stage, which is a bit sad for him, but hopefully he can find himself an inroad when there has been this kind of break in the ADC market in the LJL, and we do have a couple of good players here in that role, and I'm hoping that this guy can do really good things this split.
Yeah, and that leaves me with Cassin, who is another one of those CGA rookies. And Cassin was formerly known as Big Shot. He was part of the DRX Academy. He basically got picked up very end of 2019 to start playing in 2020. And basically within just over a year of competitive play on the Academy squad, he is now in a starting spot in a team, right? And that's kind of impressive stuff. He's got a lot to prove, but he's coming from some fairly high pedigree, right? DRX are a relatively well-regarded team out in the LCK, and to kind of step up the ranks so quickly is a good sign. That said, he is very much a rookie, so
and also
there's a lot of
DRX
rookies on this
had their
roster.
jungle problems as well. Like Pioshik has not always been. Well, he's definitely not like one of the top tier LCK junglers.
He's had his moments.
He's had his moments, but so you're kind of there like, okay, well, you're not understudying someone like, you know, Cleared or you know, Tarzan when he was back in here.
Canyon.
But still being in an LCK organization in their backroom staff and all of that kind of stuff is going to be good for you.
Yeah.
And Crest Gaming Act are the roster and are the team that did this exact thing with Arya. They took Arya, fresh out of Korea, barely played any professional. I think it was a tiny bit in the Keg Championship, which is like an inter-regional championship, not even Kesper. Didn't even get that high. Played a part of a team, got 5th to 8th, signed with CGA, and flew like nobody else, really. Maybe this might be the next Korean rookie that Crest Gaming Act have brought in and gone, oh, shh, no one quite knows how good he is. And now he's going to school everybody in the jungle, except our jungle pool is maybe pretty good, right, Initialize?
Yeah, I think it probably is. I mean, it's sad to lose Boogie and Blank, but we've still got a fair few very talented junglers around, and I think Muji and Crash, potentially Cassid as well coming in, are all very talented themselves. So that's pretty good. For me, I feel the average level probably risen a bit. Whether the top end has dropped a little, we'll have to wait and see.
We will indeed, ladies and gentlemen, and that brings us to the end of episode 1, or episode 34, depending on which way you're counting, ladies and gentlemen. That's the LJL podcast. We have talked about everything. Next week, we will be doing our predictions episode on where our placements. We're going to be doing 2 types of predictions. We're going to be doing a conjoined predictions list. This will be far more fluid. There might be a bit of placing, and we will explain that all in thorough detail, as well as also locking in our predictions for the end of the regular spring split and who we think will be at the very top of the standings and who we think will be at the bottom. We'll be going into far more depth about the team, the players themselves on those rosters, and much more. We'll be asking for your questions as well come next week. But for myself, thank you so much. Initia1ise and Nymaera, have you got any closing thoughts?
Bring on 2021
We're back,
spring.
baby.
We are well indeed back. Bring on 2020 spring for each of us. Thank you so much for listening and or watching, and we'll see you all very, very soon.